Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Dave Emmons Strange Reality Show. And I appreciate everybody's help and their views on the Facebook page. And I'm getting a lot of response from you guys. You seem like you're interested in a lot of the topics that we have. And we had ghosts, I think, the other day, and ETs the other day, and usually ETs to my home base, but I usually get off on a lot of different things here on a strange reality. And tonight's guest, or today, or in the morning, whenever you listen to this program, my guest is Mike Bass, and he's got some stories, and they're folklore stories. And folklore means that there's some truth to these stories that people hand down and pass down. Uh, I had a folklore class in college, and that's what they talked about quite a bit. That they handed down from, just like I guess in history. History's like that. When they hand things down from one generation to the next, they talk about it around fires and things like that, and also around campfires. You scare little kids with a ghost story, or and this is what this book is good about. You get this book, frightful folklore of North America, and this is written by Mike Bass. And let me show that up before we go on.
That's it right there.
That's the book there. And it's really nice book, hardcover. And Mike was nice enough to send me a copy of it. I looked through some of it and I was copying some of the notes on it. And but we're going to go at this and we're going to be talking. We're going to let Mike explain a lot of this. But here's a little bit about Mike. Mike Bass grew up in a house with spirits and has always been fascinated by myths, folklore, and the supernatural. And this is how a lot of people get their start, Mike. They have ghost experiences, or they have ET experiences when they're younger, and it plants something there, just like me when I was 13 or 14. That happened to me. And he is a printmaker, a folklorist, and a storyteller who loves hearing a good tale as much as telling one. In his art, he combines ink and pencil drawings with printed textures to create minimally layered illustrations with rough lines and simple and opaque palettes. Pilates, I guess. No,
Alex.
that's an exercise. Palettes.
Sorry about that.
Yeah,
Sorry about that.
Pilates. Okay, that works well with folks. I know that Pilates doesn't go good with
It's
drawing.
pallets. It's pallets. Call it pallets.
It works well with the folkloric subjects. He owns, with his wife, the Zip Dang shop in Madison, and is author of the Folklore Oracle. That's another book that we'll talk about a little later, and he'll tell you a little bit about that. And Frightful Folklore of North America is available for review. So take a look at it when we get this put out there, probably today or tomorrow. You'll have a chance to look at it. My glasses are really shiny. Mike, Mike Bass, could you tell us a little bit about yourself? And I know you just sound like you just got the start by being scared yourself. Tell us a little.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that is exactly what you were saying. A lot of us who are into this stuff are into it because of experience we've had. So in my case, I grew up in a house. It was built in the early 1900s in Platteville, Wisconsin. And we had at least three ghosts in that house. We had a female ghost that sort of was partial to one of the bedrooms, but she also made her way around the house. And she was actually the first one that we sort of felt or experienced. She would occasionally speak. So disembodied voices was one of the things that we experienced in the house. And then we also had a male ghost that seemed to be a little more upset and knocked things off of walls and off of shelves and caused a ruckus every now and again. And then we had a visitor ghost that would actually sort of announce her intent to enter the house. She was an older ghost. And the story that I remember the most about that is my mom and sister. I come from a big family. I'm the youngest of nine. I have seven sisters and a brother.
I got you.
Um,
I
but
come
they
from
were
family
sitting.
of 11.
What's that?
Come from a family of 11. I beat you on that one. Uh,
By a couple.
Go ahead. I had a question to ask you about the different kind of ghosts that you have in your house.
Yeah.
You can continue, finish what you're saying.
Yeah, so they were sitting out. We had sort of a back breakfast area that opened up into the backyard. They were sitting out there just having like a mid-morning coffee and talk. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, they heard a woman's voice, an older woman's voice say, "Knock, knock, knock. May I come in?" And they looked outside. There was nobody there. They looked around the rest of the house. Nobody was there. They thought it was the Avon lady or something.
Oh, okay.
And there was no one there to have made that statement.
Okay. Now
So
I had a guest on the show the other night about ghosts, and we talked about the different kinds of ghosts. There's residual energy ghosts,
yep.
and there's ghosts that just appear, and there's ghosts that minding their own business. They don't even know you're there, and they're going through their sequence that they had in past lives. And then there's the noisy ghost, like you just mentioned. Isn't that the poltergeist or whatever? That type of
Yeah, I think that's what they typically would call what the male one did, but I'm not sure if that's necessarily even what he was, because I think sometimes poltergeists can just be um, not necessarily tied to the actual location or the place. They just are there and they're causing a ruckus. These guys, I believe these spirits had some connection to the house. I'm not exactly sure what it was, but there was some sort of reason they chose to stay there, and I'm not sure, um, the rhyme or reason to it, why they didn't move on. And they were definitely aware of us as much as we were aware of them, and they were aware that we were aware of them because I think they often, in some cases, if they didn't take pleasure in it, they at least were conscious of the impact they were having on us. We moved into that house when I was about 6 or 7 years old. Um, and I always kind of compare it to or say it was much more like just a feeling or a pressure or an oppression of your senses. I have a story where I remember this was an era where you still walked home from school when you were only 7 or 8 years old. Coming down the sidewalk, my happy, normal, usual 8-year-old self, kid, and just turning that corner around to the sidewalk entry up to the house, and just feeling it kind of come down on me, just this sort of melancholy and pressure. And as a 6-year-old, 7-year-old kid, you have no idea what that is. You have no idea that's actually an emotion you should have.
Now, Mike, was that also a cold feeling that you felt? A lot of times you'll feel that cold chill and your hairs on the back of your neck stand up, Uh
Yeah.
that
Yeah, I there were definitely many occasions where the hair stood on up on the back of necks, and you got kind of that tingly feeling, sweaty palms. I don't necessarily recall cold, and I know that that's a sensation that's typically felt because they say they're sort of stealing the energy from the space around you, and it sort of just kind of chills the entire area. But in this house, it was mostly just a feeling that you weren't alone, or there was a feeling that there was somebody there, um, and melancholy, just
yeah.
sort of sadness.
Well, those were your experiences. Then it just shot you into the realm of doing your own thing and investigating and talking. And this here, I can read a little thing here. The selection of stories reveals how the voice of the indigenous peoples, combined with those of immigrants from Europe, Asia, and Africa, got together and told their stories. And you picked up on that. And were the stories similar from other countries that are here? Are they similar, or that they call them the same? Do they mix, Mike?
Yes, they do. I think what's really interesting is a lot of folklore is sort of based on that uh, human need to define something. Typically fear. A lot of times it's other emotions and other cultural aspects of a culture's, life or the way they perceive living. But much of folklore is on fear, and it's on sort of defining it, putting a face on it, putting a name on it, so that you know it. Then you can tell your kids, watch out for the edge of the ice because the Kwapilak live there, and they might draw you into the ice to the water and steal you away, or stay away from the woods because there's dangerous things in the woods. Um, you could be, a monster that's out there, the snarly yow, or, the beast of Bray Road. We have that here in Wisconsin. And so there you see commonalities from culture to culture to culture, but what you don't see from culture to culture, or what you do see in the specific cultures, is the things that are specific to them in a day-to-day life, life, like where they come from. Like folks that live in snowy areas where it gets really cold in the wintertime have a lot of creatures that deal with starvation, or things getting lean, or running out of food, and that kind of things. People that come from the Southwest, you see a lot of um, issues, or cultural frightening things that deal with, heat, or exhaustion, or lack of water.
Right.
So when you had these cultures all sort of come together, what was really neat is you saw sort of living next to each other and then actually colliding with each other, and seeing their stories just fracture into a million different pieces in all these different directions. And then the folks just kind of grabbing bits and pieces that were answering what was happening in America at the time, or North America,
Right.
to sort of define this new folklore, and to define these new fears that they were running up against.
Yeah, I think people like fears. I know as a young kid, I like going to see these monster movies when I was younger. And well, this is way back, way before you, the 50s and the 60s, And we used to like going to the shows. We used to go into the woods and stay overnight, stay in overnight in the woods, take our trusty little BB guns or little Daisy BB guns,
Yeah,
and we'd see these eyes, sometimes. And they were probably, maybe coyote or dogs or even owls, and we would really make a big deal over those eyes. We'd get scared and we'd
yeah.
start shooting our BB guns and we'd start running. I think we enjoy that fear. And I think that's what this folklore is about that you're talking about. People like a good story. They
They,
like
they,
something, yeah. That
Yeah, they definitely like a good story, and fear is a remarkable sensation. It wasn't entirely long ago. You're talking about your childhood, my childhood, but you go back 100, 200, 10,000 years, and our ability to recognize the sensations of fear would save our lives, right? So you think about when we were not the apex predator, only apex predator on the planet. You know, we saw something strange, our hair went up on our back of our necks, tingly feelings in our hands or sweaty palms. That meant to run. That meant to go find safety, or hunker down and get ready to fight. But as we moved through time, those sensations stayed the same, even if the fear was not specific to an actual danger.
Mhm.
So in our day, in our time, fear is almost more like an amusement park ride,
Right.
where we get a kick out of it.
Right. I
Those sensations.
I told my wife about your book when I got it a few days ago, and I opened to a story here and the
Oh,
illustrations. Do you do your own illustrations?
yes. Yep. Yep. Actually, the illustration came before the stories. I was an artist before I was a writer or an author. And in fact, still to this day, I think I pick my stories that I want to write about, or I want to, have either on my site or do a print for, more by whether or not it's going to be a fascinating and beautiful print,
Mhm.
almost more so than whether the story is going to be the most horrifying or
Right.
scary.
I'm looking at this book and I want to tell people Mike has a beautiful book here. I mean, it's very nice book, hard copy, very illustrated, and he put a lot of work into this in illustrations and writing. I know just writing alone is a lot of work, but he does the illustrations and it's beautiful. And there's a lot of stories in here, and I've gotten to look over a few of them. I wanted to start off, I guess I looked at the some of my notes here. I got all kinds of notes on you, and I looked at the Sasquatch of the Pacific Northwest, the wild man of America who has been spotted throughout history. And a lot of people like Bigfoot stories. Could you tell us a couple of the stories that you know about that you have written, Mike?
Yeah, I think I have a kind of a a timeline of different sightings in the book. So when you look at the Sasquatch page, you kind of get that story. But there are tales that go all the way back, to some of the first. I mean, obviously the indigenous people have many, many stories, and Sasquatch has many different names depending on the indigenous people that you're talking to. And I mean, if you think of today, even we see Sasquatch or Sasquatch type characters almost in every state, province, and even down into Mexico and Central America.
Yeah.
But the one story is, and I'm sorry, I'm going to have to look up the names of these people, but it was a early Spanish ship that was coming to the States, and they were trying to get to Mexico, but they mistook Florida for where they were supposed to end up. And so then they basically had to sort of make their way all the way across up into what is now, Alabama, Louisiana, into Mississippi and Texas, and then all the way across there trying to get into Mexico where they were supposed to be.
Mhm.
And as they got down and around sort of into the jungle areas into Mexico, the indigenous people there warned them of, yes,
Yeah,
yep,
that's the Sasquatch section of the book. And I
yep, that's it.
you
And they warned this sort of traveling Spanish group of the wild men in the woods, and to avoid them at all costs because they were dangerous.
Mhm.
In this case, these Sasquatches or these wild men were actually carnivorous. They would eat meat, and they warned them to sort of stay away from that. Um,
did we have giants live back then too? The Indians killed giants also, the Nephilim, maybe, Mike?
yeah,
Could that
yes, there's
in the
there's a handful of stories about that.
yeah,
There's some that they saw or I think they actually even found the remains of, reportedly,
right,
um, in Nevada, in Death Valley. There was supposed to be an entire underground civilization of giants.
right.
There's claims that there have been some found here in the Midwest as well, along the Mississippi River. There's been reports of finding, larger than normal arrowheads as well as larger than normal skulls and bones. And then there were some found, they think, in Delavan, Wisconsin, and those had, strange stories of multiple fingers and, six fingers on each hand.
Suppose, yeah.
And
Yeah, I didn't want to get you
oh,
off character or off your chapter, your book, but I was trying to allude to the fact that maybe some of these people were thinking that Sasquatch and the giants might have been the same, or they
oh
called
yeah,
right. So that's what I was talking about. You have a story here, 1528, Alvor Nunez,
yes,
Cabiza de Vega. I was in Texas. And
yep,
you have another story, 1792, Jose Morano Mazino, and also 1840, Elkanah Walker, Washington State. And that still carries on in 1885. These are all the stories that he's got in his book. The Wild Girl of Catahoula, Louisiana. Could you tell us about that story a little bit?
yeah. So that one they're not sure if it was a Sasquatch or a Bigfoot or sort of an actual wild person, but it was a a teenage female that they saw regularly in that part of Louisiana, running around sort of the wilds. She didn't have language. She didn't speak. She had longer hair all over her body, but she was, sort of hairless torso and face,
Mhm.
but long hair on arms and legs and hands. And they said that she could run really, really fast and could also leap great distances with great ease. And they saw this creature or this person for probably about a decade before the sightings started to stop. But she would steal livestock. There were reports of her stealing, smaller kind of calves and baby piglets. as well as catching fish with her hands out of the rivers.
Yeah,
But
she used the knife too. You're mentioning
yeah, somehow she found a tool. There was a knife that she had, and that was later on. So when they first started seeing her, she was sort of running wild through the wilderness. And then one of the last sightings they saw, she had a knife, and that was where she was actually grabbing some livestock and running off into the woods
yeah,
with it.
you wouldn't want to take her home to mom, that's for sure.
No, no, not at all. I don't think.
Yeah, but no, these stories, like I said, are folklore, but they're supposed to be true. And did you validify? I mean, did you validate some of these stories with some people who actually have seen them or heard somebody that talked about these stories? Of
Yeah, I have friends of mine that are very much into cryptozoology, Sasquatches, dogmen, Bray Road beasts, all these different things here in Wisconsin. And I've spoken to folks like that, but the stories that are in the book are more the research I did was looking at old newspapers or looking up sort of reports that were made as sort of official documents by the people that had cited it.
Right. There's one story here, 1924, Washington State. Washington State's loaded with Bigfoot stories. And this guy
Yeah.
was Fred Peck, a gold prospector, spotted a group of bears off in the distance and decided to take a shot at one of them with his rifle. To his horror, they all stood up and, after spotting him up the canyon, began to give chase, striding on 2 feet. Wow, that was big feet, I guess.
Yeah, and then
There's several of them. So, yeah, and once safely back at the cabin, Beck and his fellow prospectors endured a night-long attack from the guerrilla men. Rocks pelted the walls and the roof of their small cabin, and boulders crashed into the walls. The prospectors claimed that one of the creatures even thrust its hair-covered arm. I guess that's how they was able to tell that they were humanoid or giants.
yeah,
Hair-covered arm and his hand, you know, probing wildly in the air. And I heard a story about that with wasn't it Teddy Roosevelt and Henry Ford and them camped out one time and they had the same experience. It sounded like, Mike.
yes, yep, they did. And I think this one about Fred Peck and his group in Ape Canyon is a fairly well-known one. If you talk to a lot of Sasquatch and Bigfoot enthusiasts, they'll usually know this particular story. But yes, Teddy Roosevelt had an encounter. He had a friend who was sort of a German immigrant who had done a lot of traveling out in the West that told him many, many stories about his encounters with the Sasquatch or Bigfoot. And then I think also Teddy Roosevelt's book, he accounted or has accounts of some of those stories.
Yeah, I heard those stories, from actually, like you said, it's in his book, it's in his memoirs.
Yeah, yeah, he
And
wrote about it. Yep.
uh, but then you go into the Bigfoot. The reason why I'm covering the Bigfoot is because a lot of people are interested in Bigfoot right now, and there's actual pictures of some of them that they show on the internet, and I
Yep.
hope they're actual pictures. A lot of times they're not. Uh, Here's one. I think the Superstition Mountains. They covered that in the TV documentaries in 1937 mining camp. Could you tell us a little bit about that one?
Yeah, so these guys had been out working for much of the day, and they were kind of settling down for the night. And I think they had actually gone to sleep at a certain point in time. And they heard their horses and their mules causing a commotion. It woke them up in the middle of the night. And as they ran over there, they saw a large creature, probably they estimated around 8 feet tall, weighing about 500 pounds, covered in all hair, covered in hair, hauling off one of their donkeys just right over its shoulder into the wild. Um, and they said that even afterwards, the rest of their horses, when they got them all settled down and sort of regrouped, some of them even had this sort of a stink or a smell that was on them. And it took a while for them to actually polish it off or wash it off of their animals.
Yeah, I uh, I just feel that I know that they exist, but I don't think, you know, I don't think all of them are real pictures that they're bringing back. I think
Yeah.
more are kind of somebody in a suit. But I want to believe because I've never seen one. I've seen ETs and UFOs, but I've never seen a Bigfoot. But I believe in them, and I believe the stories that they're talking about. Even the some of the older stories that you're talking about. You go back through time and you listen through date. I also want to say about this book, and I'm very impressed about the book. I'm holding it in my hands, and Stoker nominated author of Goddess of Fifth, 2021, The Haunting of Alejandro, 2023, Immortal Pleasures, 2024. This guy did a foreword by V. Castro of your
Yep.
book.
That's a female author who lives in London. Yep.
Okay, I
She,
I see another story that brought me back, and I asked you earlier if it had anything to do with Alton. And I know Alton. I lived in Alton in Illinois, but this is in Texas. Could you
yep.
tell us the story about the Goat Man? There's been a lot of stories about Goat Man all over the country, I think. Could you tell us that story about the Texas Goat Man?
Yep. And again, our stories all across the country, sort of, especially with folklore, take on a flavor. I mentioned this before, or sort of, they hearken to the trials and the hard times that we have, or that the folks have, in the particular regions that they live. And another thing about folklore is that it often will depict what's happening in sort of like, we call it the zeitgeist. What's the spirit of the times? What's happening, or what's happened through the era, or through time, in certain areas. And this one is sort of, it has a very sad beginning, because it's a man, in sort of the Jim Crow era, who's sort of uh, an African American man who's made good with his profession. He's raising goats. He's got a goat farm. He's selling a lot of goat cheese. He's got goat, the pelts, and also selling the goat meat. And so he hangs on this bridge, this sign that says, turn here to see the goat man. Well, what happens is there are certain people in the city, or his town where he lives, Alton, that get kind of upset about his success and decide to burn down his farm and run him out. Well, it takes on a bit of its own energy, and they end up, trying to lynch the man. And they toss him over the bridge with the noose around his neck, and there was no sort of jolt of the noose. And so they look down, and the body, he's gone. So they tried to do this, and he just disappeared. Not too long after that, this creature starts to show up on the bridge that's, 8 feet tall, has, the hindquarters of a large sort of goat, has a goat head, massive horns, and he starts sort of taking out, one after another, the men who, you know, lynched the other person, who murdered, the goat man, the original goat man, the person who was raising goats. And so then over time, this goat continues to reside by this bridge, and there's a certain technique that you need to use. You go out and you knock on the iron bridge, Alton Bridge, 3 times, and the goat man is supposed to come out of the wilderness. And it starts with him throwing rocks. It starts with him, kind of launching sticks and things towards the bridge, and then eventually he actually shows up at the bridge if you have the courage to sort of wait
Hmm.
for him to do that. If you can wait out the rocks and the sticks being tossed at you.
Has there any of these stories that you've written about in the book, and there's quite a few of them, has any of these stories with these phenomenal or these supernatural beings, have they ever killed a lot of people? Have they ever done damage to people, Mike?
Um, I'm trying to think about that. I don't think that any of them have actually murdered or killed or maimed anybody. I mean, obviously there's stories of Sasquatches sort of, carrying people off. I think you'll see a few of them in here where, I can't remember the fella, who escaped it.
There was some
There's one
stories
in here.
stories
Yeah,
in Alaska where people were killed by Sasquatch and big, the Bigfoot up there. And their
Yeah.
particular town, I had a couple of guys that on my show that talked about it. They visited this town in Alaska, and they said that they actually left. They had to leave that little town because people were getting murdered, and they said it was a beast that would just rip them from arm to arm and leg to leg, and so that scared them. They got out of there. That was a Bigfoot, and they
Yeah.
talked about this Bigfoot climbing down a tree and was invisible. All you could see with the leaves moving and stuff. And
Oh my gosh.
wow, that means
Yeah.
dimensional critters. Is that what you would think, Mike?
That's what I would say that would be. But yeah, I think too now thinking back, Ogopogo is a lake monster up in Canada. There's claims that he has devoured some people. I write about the Valley of the Headless Men.
Yeah.
There have people been who have disappeared there. That could easily be a Bigfoot or something similar to it, but they typically go crazy first, and then they find their corpse, their headless corpse somewhere. Some oftentimes with all of their possessions burned. Um, yeah, the Gitchigami Goonch, which is supposedly a large catfish type creature in the St. Louis River that runs between Superior and Duluth. There's tales of that thing, possibly consuming a human. It's big enough.
Uh,
So,
they had this movie, The Headless Horseman. I used to love to watch that. I guess there's a couple of renditions of that movie, but that was taken in England, I think, or back in the old days, back in the 14th or 15th century. And
yeah,
the Headless Horseman, always enjoyed that movie as a kid. And you also have a story about a headless nun in the
yes.
book. What is that about, real quick? There's so many stories. I just cover a little briefly. Give it a little
Yeah,
taste of them.
yeah, yeah. So the Headless Nun is about when the Acadians, New France, was sort of converting to British rule. A lot of the folks who had immigrated to Canada at that, well, it was New France at that time, but the Canadian area up around Quebec, um, were fearful that when the Brits came in, when the British came in and took over the area, that they would become sort of second-class citizens. They could be robbed. They could be stolen. Their things could be taken away from them. So they took a lot of these Acadians met up and they sort of pooled all their resources into this strong box, a chest, and they took it to this young nun for safekeeping. And they told her, take this out into the wilderness, find a place, bury it. Don't tell us where it is. When we need this cash, we'll come back for it. Um, well, in the midst of all of those folks who had put their money, there were a couple of folks who thought, well, this would be a great way to make a lot of cash. We could, go pressure the nun to tell us where the box is, and suddenly we have the entire community's, valuables. So these three thieves follow her one night when she's walking back from the town to the monastery or to the nunnery, and they grab her and they try to pressure her into telling her where the money is. She doesn't relent. She never tells them where it is. And eventually, they've caused so much damage that they can't even look at her. So one of them lops off her head, puts it in a bag, and throws it into the ocean.
Oh,
Right, and they left her there. And again, very much like Headless Stories, it wasn't long after her death that people started to see just her form sort of walking along the path where she was abducted from or taken by the thieves. Um, and even till this day, people see her, and she's the reports are that she's looking for her head. She doesn't cause any, I mean, the only harm she causes is terrifying people or scaring them out of their wits, and then asking them if they've seen her head.
yeah. I I've heard of stories like that, and as a kid, we seen them in movies, but we never saw headless, people, as spooks or ghosts. But I guess that was I lived in Alaska for a couple of years, Mike, and you talk about this moose, the ghost moose. It was that
Yes.
was in Maine, in the United
Yep. This
States.
one's in Maine. This story comes from Maine. They have a lot of moose there too.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I had moose in my backyard up in Alaska, and it was kind
They're tremendously large. They're
of,
very big animals.
yeah, you don't want to mess with them either. You stay
Oh,
clear of them. When I drove by them, I drove by real slow, didn't want them to charge. And in rutting season, they're really bad. But this ghost moose from Maine, what it says here, morning's light has just begun to wake from the nocturnal slumber. A late September haze has just turned off, drifting the waves through aspen and I guess larch, covering trees of underbrush and layer of morning damp. That kind of paints the picture. And there amongst the fog is a massive moose. And did they try to shoot this ghost moose?
yes. So the story of this one goes, and I started that one out trying to sort of paint that picture
Yeah.
of hunting. I don't know. Being in Alaska, I'm sure you've gone out hunting for things, but as a Wisconsin kid, my dad and a couple of my brother-in-laws always tried to get me to want to hunt stuff. So I've been on a couple of hunts, although I've never actually killed anything. But you have sort of that morning light that sort of you get out there early so that the animals don't know you're there. And as the light kind of comes up through the woods and sort of that mist dissipates and things start to light up, is typically when you start to see the creature or the prey that you're out there, trying to capture or trying to hunt. And in this case, they hunt moose in Maine. And the idea of this story is just, to have a limit to your sort of mania, right?
Mhm.
A lot of people who go hunting, they want to get that animal. They want to get that prize sort of kill to brag about, to have mounted in their house, to even to supply them for the meal over the cold months of winter. And in this case, you can pursue this ghost moose to the point of exhaustion and even to the point of death, where you've pursued this moose and you're now tired. You're out in the middle of nowhere. You don't know where you're at. You're out of food. You're waist deep in snow. Um, and they're not going to find you until next spring. so, so the story, or I guess the moral of this story is to have a limit to the pursuits or to your I guess, maniacal or mania of trying to pursue something.
Maybe that ghost moose has some kind of a power on him. I was going to
That too.
show the picture of the Bigfoot drawing that you had, and this is like folklore drawings, and they're really neat. And if you buy this book, you'll see all those. And I wanted to get into another story here too, the Wendigo. Now we've heard a lot about the Wendigo, Mike, and this Wendigo story is the Great Lakes region of Canada and the United States. The Wendigo, and I think you have a drawing here of it. Uh,
Yep.
yep, that's the Wendigo.
Yep.
Was that kind of a goat or some kind of a deer or
So that this is definitely a story that has seen the two cultures kind of come together and mesh. And you've seen sort of what folklore does is it it travels as well as it sort of evolves. When you look at the Algonquin or the Ojibwe indigenous folks, their idea of a Wendigo is much more of like a demon or a spirit that exists or resides um, primarily to pressure or to influence humans to consume other humans or to do horrendous things when things get lean. So in the very dark months of winter when food's out, like for instance, one of the stories is that the Donner Party, traveling out west that got stuck up in the Cascade Mountains or the Sierra Nevada mountains, was visited by a Wendigo, and this is why they chose to sort of consume each other. But the Ojibwe, especially up in Canada, actually have full-on Wendigo stories where they feel people have been possessed by a Wendigo, and then they've killed members of their family and actually consumed them. stories of the Wendigo for me started with my dad and my uncles, my mom's brothers, um, talking about articles and stories that they had read where the Wendigo was much more just a spirit of nature.
Hmm.
It was if you mess with nature too much, the Wendigo will come and it will, you know, seek revenge on you for the things you've done against the world, against the earth, against other people.
Right.
So a lot of people depict him as or depict the Wendigo as sort of a skinny, sort of starving, falling apart animal. A lot of times, though, it has the antlers on it, and that's where my Wendigo sort of has more of that deer face and deer body, although it's walking on its hind legs.
Right. Yeah, there's so many, there's a lot, all these are short stories in this book. And,
Yes.
and a lot of people like that. A lot of people don't have patience anymore to read a whole book at a time, but you have these short stories in which you could go through and read a story at a time or a couple of stories and then fall asleep or get scared, whatever. But another
Put
story,
it down.
yeah, put it down and but then to go back to it. But then you have these stories that I've never heard about, and a lot of people haven't. High Hat, New York, United States. The western edge of New York sinks towards Lake Ontario and into heavily wooded marshland known as the Western Door. Mostly uninhabitable, the swamps are thick in vegetation and broad rooted trees growing heavy with moss. For over 1,000 years, this land has been home to the indigenous Seneca people, brave. I guess these are Native American Indians who have shared these wilds with sinister resident known as High Hat. Who was High Hat, real quick?
So there's no indication of who he was, but it seems or it would the way the story goes is it would suggest that he was sort of a nefarious or um, shaman who practiced bad medicine or bad magic, and got very, very good at it and has somehow found a way to extend his life. But those who have seen him say that he's sort of dressed in sort of early colonial indigenous person attire. So he's got sort of a hat and a European style hat and jacket, but is also, barefoot and has very sort of, yes, grayish skin.
Yeah,
Um,
right there.
and yes, and his teeth are all sharp and kind of gnarly, and it's because of his ability or having been able to extend his life as long as he has. And the trouble that he causes is basically, again, for those who are doing just stuff they shouldn't be doing in his territory. So loggers have had trouble there. Developers have had trouble or seen him there, as well as stories from early on, uh, early colonial days of people seeing this person or this thing out in the wilderness.
Mhm. I
And whether he's killed somebody or not, we don't know because apparently there's been no signs or nothing left if he has.
I guess back in the old days, they didn't keep track of people like they do now, birth certificates and computer records on people. Uh,
Yeah.
I noticed that you have in this book, you have a lot of like signs or something that was taken from
Yep.
those signs warning people and telling them, not to go into the woods. And I've seen quite a few of these in your book. And it's take care, never use the same iron on a horse
Yep.
twice, it brings bad luck the horse and to the rider. Uh, Neither kindness nor obligation should impel a gentleman to lend another man his hat, horse, gun, or boots. That's now. Here's a picture that reminds me. I don't. It reminds me of an ET.
Yeah. Yep. A little bit. So that's a haint,
Yeah, the
and that's a Gula name for a spirit.
Mhm.
And in this case, a haint is sort of a soul who lived an unfortunate life, was not happy living their life, was not a happy living human, And so in death, they've become just the same miserable kind of ornery, upset haunting. And these spirits don't necessarily have a place that they want to stay. They actually seek out other people who are sort of downtrodden and attached to them in the hopes or the or with the I guess the idea that they can destroy their life similar to how the Haint's life was destroyed and make them miserable in death as well.
Kind of like an evil spirit, right?
Yeah, yeah, it's kind of a nefarious little critter. Yep.
So so they'll cling on or they'll jump. Like a lot of people, ghost people
Yeah.
say they jump your soul or your being. And it says here how to rid yourself of a haint. Paint your porch ceiling blue. Haints can't cross water. The blue ceiling will confuse them. Uh, that's what they did in Maui. They painted their roof
Yep.
blue, I guess, not to be burned up. And I don't want to go into that. That would have to go into the entertainment value only. Burn sage. A lot of people still do that,
Mhm.
and
Yep.
that's an ancient, I guess, Native American, I guess, way of dealing with evil spirits and stuff. Do you think it works, Mike? The burning of the sage?
Um, that, I'm not positive if it does or not. It seems to work for some folks. I wonder, or I would almost believe that your belief in it working potentially allows it to work.
Mhm.
I do know that, or I've read uh, documentation or stories of people doing that, where the haunting gets better for a while, but then ends up getting much worse later on. So I think too, it just depends on the severity of the haunting or your actual belief that it's going to have an effect.
Well, the reason why this story it kind of sticks out to me and how to get rid of Haint, in which is an evil spirit, is because a lot of people have ghosts in their house and they want to get rid of them, and
Hmm.
they bring in a priest or they bring in a reverend to do that. And it says here, clean your house top to bottom, spick and span, use pine and camphor to mop the floors. Build a bottle tree, put bottles on it, toss salt across your threshold. I've heard a lot about that too.
Yep.
Hang a mirror and paste the walls with newspaper. Uh, those are kind of like those are older type methods and whatever back in the day. When did they come out with this type of this? I know the sage is a real old type of thing, but what about these other things? This come out in the 1800s or
Yep.
1700s?
Yeah, this would have been yeah, sort of like late 1800s is when sort of many of the slaves were emancipated. They were allowed to live their lives, and they sort of all kind of had to figure out where they were going to set up residence. And a lot of them set up on the coast there on those islands off of the Carolinas and Georgia. And so some of these traditions as they were spoken about or sort of established then or passed down then had actually come from even older places. Like um, Haints are supposed to be fascinated with counting games, which is very similar to what you see with werewolves as well as vampires. If you can get them to count something, they can only some count to a certain height or a certain number. Like they'll get to 12 and then they'll get confused and have to count all over. So you'll see, places where you'll put 13 items on the step of your house, and it stops them because they can't cross that. The idea of the newspapers being pasted on the side of the wall or on your wall as wallpaper, the haint is compelled to read it. So until they read through all of the newspapers, they can't do anything else.
Right.
Right. And
Yeah.
then the mirror itself is often haints are very vain, even though they've lived miserable lives and are having a horrible afterlife. They're very vain and they get caught just looking at themselves in the mirror and sort of admiring who they are.
I notice you have a lot of stories here that cover like Mexico and South
Hmm.
Central America, and your book, Frightful Folklore of North America, you also go into Greenland, to the
Yeah.
Panama Canal with all these stories, Mexico. And I see in the back of the book is a lot of Spanish areas or a lot of Mexican areas, South American areas. And here's the biggest one I think the North American people would be associated with is the Chupacabra. Uh,
Hmm.
can you tell us when that came up? That's not a new monster. I think that's what it's ancient. Did it start in Puerto Rico? And
Yes, it started sort of on the western side of Puerto Rico, and I don't believe it was that long ago. I think it was in the late 90s.
yeah, did
Was
that's
some of the early stories. Yeah, and I have a very
there's
similar section.
your
1975 is when they kind of first started seeing them, but then I have a similar section to the Sasquatch section about the sightings in Puerto Rico
yeah.
of the Chupacabra. Um, but yeah, it was at first they didn't even see it. They started to find chickens, rabbits, pets, and even like larger, larger small cattle, goats. That's what, chupacabra means goat sucker, with all of their blood drained. And it wasn't until, they thought it was possibly a vampire, except the puncture marks on the neck were three holes. And it wasn't until quite a bit later that they actually saw one running about in the wilderness, and understood what they were dealing with. That it was not a vampire, but it was something else, and gave it the name Chupacabra.
Yeah, you have here that looks like the beginning of your stories, 1975, Mocha,
Yeah.
Puerto Rico. It all started with the death of 15 cows, swiftly followed by the death of a small herd of goats, a few geese, and a pig. All were found dead in the fields. That many critters. Wow. A pattern of triangle marks on their necks and their bodies, drained entirely of the blood. At first, the community feared it was a vampire. And you also have a story of a vampire in here too. I think it's a
Yes.
Spanish tale of a vampire, and
Yeah.
the tales of the El Vampire. You have that story in here. But Mocha quickly spread, and some suspected a satanic cult in the midst. I've heard that's where it started, and then you go all the way to, let's see, December 1995. Uh, Guanica, Puerto Rico, and
Yep.
seemed like it really got its start in Puerto Rico, and then it expanded in I guess South America and Mexico, and then it come up into Texas. Is that right, Mike?
Yep, that is exactly right. And it seems too that some of the as it has moved, or as the stories of it have moved, the look of it has also changed as well. Um, like the one that was seen in Puerto Rico was sort of this creature with the hard spikes coming out of its back, had a circular mouth and sort of olive or almond shaped eyes, almost like some sort of an alien type creature, an ET.
Right.
And which I would almost believe the Puerto Rico variety of this to be, because it also had the three puncture marks. That's how it was getting to what it wanted from the animal, the blood. Um, but as you see stories of it in Mexico and Texas, and even sort of in like eastern Texas into Mississippi and Louisiana, it's more of a dog-like creature. It's more of a hairless dog, with coarse hair, not spikes, and it runs around on all fours, not necessarily standing on its feet, on 2 feet.
Yeah, there's pictures and documentaries, and there was some lady doctor who actually killed one, and
Yeah.
she had the body, and then they took tests on it, and it did have a canine DNA in it, and then there was some other DNA. I forget what it was. Do you remember that, Mike? What it,
I can't remember that one. Like I said, for my story, I mainly stuck to the original sort of tale of Puerto Rico, where it seemed like it was more of a ET
right?
type urban legend
So
or story
so
encounter.
I think most people remember that it come from Puerto Rico, but I didn't think it was as early as 1975. That's
Yeah.
pretty historical. So that I want to bring out these stories. I know you got a lot more stories than that, but I'm bringing out stories that people might associate with that,
Yeah.
us Americans, and go on. Uh, Here's an interesting story. I got marked here. I'm not marking your book up. I'm not dog earing it either. I'm using
Hey,
I'm
it's
using
your book now. You own it. You can, yeah, you can.
yeah, I'm using yellow, tags on it, and that's how I picked out the stories. But Cyclone Annie of Illinois, since I'm from Illinois, Annie lived a few miles from the edge of town on a small plot and between two cornfields. The old woman kept to herself, walking to town once a week for a few groceries, an occasional bottle of rye whiskey. Oh, she's a drunk. Okay. Although she was an unassuming woman, she often attracted the attention of groups of rambunctious teens, and it was all about matter of time before talk of her unusual quietness and solitary life transitioned to a name calling crazy. Look, loon and the farmers, and so not reading more into this, you can take over me. And they called her a witch. uh, so Mike, Cyclone Annie, how did she get the name, and what happened to her?
So, I mean, it's again, folklore has tropes. There's lots of things that happen through folklore that explain why something happens, and one of them is, and you see this going all the way back, to the actual witch hysteria. When people were actually mostly women, as well as some men and some children, uh, executed for being witchcrafts. Um, Annie would probably be what would be considered like a hedge witch. She's living on like sort of the edge of society. She's solitary. She keeps to herself. Um, and as we know from so many folk tales out there, outsiders are not always accepted, and they often meet unfortunate ends through bullying or different types of treatment by commoners, the people who fear them. And in this case, Annie, as they're burning down her house and chasing her out of town, threatens that she will be back in a year and destroy the city. There's a very similar story to this um, in the South. I'm trying to remember what it is. They actually put a chain around her her grave. But in this case, a year to the day that Annie passed, there was a massive tornado that ripped through their city and destroyed everything in it, except for the small grocery store where they later saw a woman dressed entirely in black walking through the town, going to pick up some groceries, and then walking out of this out, walking into the sunset.
But she was just probably just an ordinary old woman that's
Yeah,
very cool.
and I mean, I think the folkloric value to this, or the moral to the story is, mind your manners. Don't bully people. Don't consider someone to be something they're not just because they're not like you. I mean, most of folklore has some sort of tale to tell, or some sort of lesson to learn from it, and those are kind of the stories I like. But I mean, not all of them do, obviously. Like Chupacabra doesn't necessarily have that, or Bigfoot doesn't necessarily have that, but some of the stories that are just told for story's sake do.
Right. I'm looking at another name that's familiar to me, and I want to know about this. Gitchigami, Goonch, and
Yep.
it's in Minnesota, in the U.S., and flowing between the twin ports of Superior in Wisconsin and Duluth, Minnesota. The St. Louis River lazily empties into the Lake Superior. That's the location. So, what was this Gitchigami Goonch? I heard of Gitchigami. Am I?
Yeah, so I mean, this one was actually told to me by somebody from up in that area, um, in Superior. And it's sort of a tale. I'm not even sure when it started or when it would have begun, but a goonch is like a giant catfish.
No.
Um, and so uh, this is a tale sort of environmental sort of destruction or environmental disrespect, because that river, as it flows from northern Minnesota, it comes down through some of the wildest parts of Minnesota and probably the most pristine areas. And then as it gets into more of the industrial areas between those two cities, which are larger cities, it's, got the concrete shores. It's been dredged many times. It's been deepened so barges and ships can come in, and there's bridges on it, that lift up so ships can come in. And of course, there's been several, different factories and industrial plants and things that have been on there that have poured stuff in. So this idea is that because of the environment that we have created in this once pristine river, we've allowed this giant, massive new predator to sort of grow and become a thing in that river that we need to sort of also fear.
Mhm.
So the story goes, it kind of swims out in the warm water of the St. Louis River and then hits sort of that cooler water of the Lake Superior, Gitchigami, which is the indigenous name for it, and finds its prey. Lake Superior is also is a very popular scuba space. So the theory is that when a diver disappears or when a ship sinks, because it's also claimed a lot of sea vessels or lake vessels moving across Lake Superior, that's when the goonch feeds.
Yeah. And it sounds like the same old thing that we've heard back in ancient biblical times is, and people say it today, the devil made me do it,
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah,
they had to have something to
yeah,
blame. And that's where
yeah,
a lot of the folklore come from. Now, Ogopogo, now that story's been known to a lot of people. That's
yeah.
Colombia, Canada. Can you tell us a little bit about that and when did that start?
And so that is a very old story. I mean, that goes way back.
1800s, mid 1800s, you're saying.
Yep, and I mean, even the indigenous folk up there had stories of a water spirit that lived in the lake. And the lake itself is quite deep. It's one of those glacier lakes that sort of got cut as the glaciers came down. Um, I can't remember exactly the full depth of it. I have it in here somewhere. Um, but I mean, yes, it's a very deep lake. Its walls are very, very steep, and it's not very wide. It's only a mile wide, but it's something like 60 miles long. It's like a finger lake, and it's incredibly deep and very steep on the edges. So it's very possible. It's very much like Loch Ness in Scotland, where you think there could actually be a creature that lives in there because it is so deep. But these reports come from, the indigenous people would offer a blood sacrifice before they would cross the waters,
Right.
and that was supposed to satisfy this monster. Um, and there's a tale of Chief Timbasket who didn't do it. He was too proud to do it, and he took his entire family in a boat across the lake, and was immediately sucked down, in a whirlpool in a wild sort of violent, watery type occurrence. And then even in settlers' times, there was a man who was swimming his horses across the lake and had one of them, yep, had
Uh,
one of them pulled down, and just barely got it out before he lost his two horses that he was traveling across the lake with.
Now, the
But
reason why I want to show people your drawings is because they're they give you the impression of what this critter was or what these supernatural beings were. It gives you an idea what they are. Not exactly, but it's from your mind and your thoughts and what you pick up, and that's what I want to express to people. This book
yep.
is really loaded with these types of illustrations, and it's really neat. But let's see. There's another one here. We'll stay in Canada, Newfoundland, and it's the Bell Island Swamp Hag, and you got her. kind of like look like she's in a frenzy or something. She,
Yep. So this is a story, swamps in a northern terrain where things can get kind of frozen and thawed and frozen and thawed. They just have a lot of like there's a lot of smells in swamps. There's a lot of textures in swamps. And this is a story of there's a couple of them. There's a couple of origin stories for the Bell Island swamp hag. One takes place in early settlers' times. She was a woman who came upon some thieves who were planning to do a big heist, and because they didn't trust her not to tell somebody, they took her to the swamp and they drowned her face down into the mucky water. There was another one where there was a Nazi vessel off the coast, and some of the men were on shore getting some information about what was happening here in North America, and she stumbled upon them, and then they obviously couldn't let them know who the spies in the community were and who were giving the enemy information, and so they drowned her in the swamp. But the ending of the story basically is if you're out in the swamp, usually towards sunset, you'll possibly see this young woman in a white dress, handsome, very, very pretty person walking in the distance. And as they're walking in the distance, if they catch sight of you, they may turn and start walking towards you. And as she starts walking towards you, from one tree or one scene to another, as she passes in sight and out of sight, she becomes more and more sort of decayed and sort of haunting, obviously. And eventually, as she gets to you, and I'm going to give away the end of the story, she will drown you in the swamp as well, basically saying, "Smell what I smelled, taste what I taste," and that's the end of you.
yeah.
So
There,
again,
there's actually movies of stories like
yes,
that. They've taken,
yes.
I think they've taken these folklore stories like you have here, and they made them into movies. And so that's I've seen that in a movie with a invisible woman. There's also another lady that I guess it's not familiar with me, but Resurrection Mary. So long as we're talking about ghost women, and this is in Illinois. This is another story from Illinois. And what was about her icy blue eyes that drew people in and she liked to dance? And was she a
So her story is that it goes that she was an actual young woman who went to a dance in the 1920s and somehow met her end on her way home, whether she was hit by a car, picked up by somebody, or something happened. But her spirit now still will attend clubs or dances sort of on the south side of Chicago. Um, and she'll typically seek out the person who's by themselves. In this case, my story, it's a group of people that are out, and there's one guy who's unattached. And as he's at the dance, he's kind of, searching the wallflowers, and he lands upon her. And common to the stories about her, she will, have contact with people. They'll dance the night, they'll dance through the night. She'll talk to them. They'll have an interesting time. They may even, exchange a kiss. And in some cases, if the person offers her a ride home, she'll accept it and get in the car. And she kind of gives the instructions to where she wants to go, sort of one turn at a time, until at last you sort of reach Resurrection Cemetery there on the south side of Chicago. And in some cases, the person will stop and she'll get out of the car. And as she runs across the road to the cemetery, which is very bewildering to the person giving her a ride, she just sort of dissipates. Other times, she won't say that she's supposed to be dropped off at the cemetery. It's just as they pass the gates going down that road, she dissipates in the car seat next to them.
I've seen some stories on Believe It or Not, or some of these, science fiction type stories uh, at night with a ghost, where a woman pick up a hitchhiker and
Yep,
she hitchhikes and it gets in. Now, does she materialize enough for a guy to be fooled by a kiss? Uh,
that's what they say. Yeah, they say that she can manifest in a physical form.
well.
And even like her dress and her attire is dated looking. It looks, of the era of the 1920s, her hair and her makeup and everything. Um, but it's not dirty or dingy, or it doesn't look as if it's, 100 years old. She looks as if she could have just walked out of a salon or something and into the dance.
Yeah, I've seen that, and I would drive these old country roads, and I think I'm going to see a ghost hitchhiking sometime, and that you have that feeling because I've heard these
Yeah.
stories before. Here's another story here that kind of drew my attention because it could be related to ET. I don't know how it could be, but Gray Man, South Carolina, United States.
That's another haunting. Yeah, that's another haunting. The Gray Man. This took place in earlier, sort of era of settlement of South Carolina, when people still had grand homes, sort of on the coast that could be within hurricane damageable locations. And in this case, this gentleman is trying to race to his fiance's home to help them vacate because he knows there's a massive storm coming. And he cuts across sort of a swampy area. And by that time, the swells had already risen to a height where sort of those swampy areas were filled in and probably treacherous to cross. And he ends up drowning in one of those areas. But he still continues on as a spirit. He goes to warn his fiance that she needs to get their family out of there right now because the storm is coming and it's going to be a big one. And they do. And so now down there along the coast, people still see this gray man spirit. He's sort of dressed in that era, wearing sort of like the riding coat and the tall boots,
Mhm.
tricorn hat. And they typically see this spirit before a hurricane lands, before even like you can see the signs of the hurricane coming. It's out there. Obviously, we have weather systems now. We have, we have the National Weather Association that will tell you if a hurricane is coming. But you many people will have claimed to have seen this man dressed entirely in gray of that era before hurricanes land in South Carolina or along that coast.
Mhm. Here's a story that brings back memories. My mom used to scare us. We used to hear in the woods. We lived close to the woods, not big woods, but we'd hear a screaming of a woman, and it was kind of like a long, high scream, high pitch. And my mom would tell us stories when she was a little girl that she would hear that high pitched screaming sound. And what I'm talking about is the banshee that you have here. And,
Yes.
and that's another one that looks like she's a little frazzled a little bit, but this was in South Dakota, the United States. And my brother and his wife went there one time several years ago. They saw strange lights. They saw
Yep.
saw a filling station that they thought was open, and they drove into it and it was closed. It wasn't nothing there. I mean, it was really an old filling station. But she said that they got really scared, and they drove out of town, and they saw a motorcycle that was behind them, and but there wasn't a rider on it. That's ghostly. That
That's wild.
yeah. So the Banshee of South Dakota. That's could you?
Yeah, Banshee of the Badlands. So the Badlands are sort of it's an ancient seabed out in the Dakotas, and there's Badlands in other places around the world as well. But the one that we kind of all know or are familiar with, it's a national park, is out there in South Dakota. Um, and during sort of the travels west, pioneer days, it was actually a very bad place. There are lots of places that folks could hide out there, ambushes could take place,
Mhm.
people could be taken advantage of. And so, as the story goes, perhaps this is what occurred to this woman, and maybe her remains were never found. And so, um, stories started of travelers going across, the Badlands, kind of getting through there, and then even into this day of seeing the spirit first. You might see a lightning storm or lights that are flashing in the sky, and then seeing her in a distance, and as she slowly gets closer, you begin to realize that she's sort of pleading. She's desperate for something, some sort of assistance or help. And when it's realized that there's nothing you can do for her and there's, no aid that you can give her, she sort of disappears and dissipates into the air as well.
I think your book is something that you can take it to like Boy Scouts or and read it around the campfire, and kids
Yeah.
they love it. And we covered the book pretty good. I was talking about going into this other book that you got, Folklore Oracle, and this is Discover Ancient Wisdom and Powerful Folklore of Oracle Journey. And you have, I guess, the cards, companion booklet, and could you tell us about that and usage and application? Tell us a little bit about that book that you wrote. Is that your first book or?
Yeah, that was my first thing that I put together with Watkins. It's an Oracle deck, so it's sort of a tarot-ish, uh, but it doesn't have the suits. And my particular Oracle deck is based entirely on folklore. So there's 60 cards in there. Some deal with the folklore of trees. Some deal with the folklore of animals and insects and reptiles. And then, yeah, others deal with, deities and actual spirits and folklore tales. And one of the things that was a really neat observation with folklore, and I talk about this quite a bit, I've talked about this earlier, is that we have a lot of the same beliefs and stories about things, like, an oak tree to the ancient, Romans, the Greeks, to even today, through different civilizations, kind of meant the same thing. It was strong, it meant strength, it meant longevity, honesty, truthfulness. And so with the folklore oracle, what you can do, or what I did, is I sort of tied these concepts we had for different things, trees, animals, deities, and ghosts or hauntings or cryptids, and attached a meaning to them that we can use in our current lives.
Mhm.
So say if you take the deck and you draw a card and you pull um, a Sasquatch, for instance, Sasquatch is in there.
Right.
Um, we know that he kind of hides it in his infamy, right? He's sort of an elusive type creature. He's out there, we all know about him, but we very rarely see him. That might be a sign, drawing that card, that you need to just take a little bit of a break. You need to just chill a little bit,
Yeah.
right? And just sort of exist for a while, and go see your friends if you want to, but for the most part, just sort of take it easy.
Mhm.
So that was a lot of fun. It was really sort of a exercise in sort of figuring out and defining what things have meant to the different, to the Scythians, to the Babylonians, to the, Greeks, Romans, Germans, the Slavs, up through time, and trying to assign that to each and every card that's in the deck.
Mhm. Well, that's pretty neat. You're pretty creative with this, and I think people would love it. I think I'd recommend the book highly because it to me it brought back some memories of some of the things I was scared of when I was a kid, like
Yeah.
the Banshee and this ghost woman and all this that I brought up. Most of the things I brought up in Illinois, of course, I'm from Illinois, so
Yeah.
I know a little bit about the folklore of Illinois, but I I think a lot of people my age or even younger would appreciate these types of stories. And throughout history, there was folklore stories handed down from generation to generation. I think that's basically how we got the Bible.
Yeah.
It just
Yeah.
down generation to generation. Now, to sum it up, uh, Mike, could you tell us how much of the folklore do you believe is true, and how much do you think it is kind of made up?
Well, so I lean towards belief on pretty much
Mhm.
anything, any of the kind of stories you're going to tell me, because I grew up in a haunted house, and
Yeah.
I've had the experience where, these strange things have happened to me over my life, and to me they just are things that have happened. And so I'll talk about them to people, and then you'll get those people that give you the big come
Yeah.
on, right? And it's like, no, this did happen, and it's like, you don't have to believe me, but it did happen. But to have somebody to have something happen to you, and then you tell the story, and somebody just like waves it off like it's nothing. You know, I tend to want to not be the person that does that to other people.
Right. Yeah, you want to listen to what they have to say. And it's just
Yep.
like when people bring their experiences on my show, I like getting people who have new experiences to talk about. But a lot of them kind of back out because they don't want to be ridiculed. You know,
No.
their peers and their family are telling them, well, don't do that. You know, they're going to look crazy. Well, I'm too old. I don't worry anymore. So I tell I tell it like it is, and I tell the truth, and the truth never leaves your memory. That's a fact.
Yep.
And a lot of these stories I've heard, and I've heard witnesses like on TV. Some of these stories you're talking about, I actually seen in a certain version of it. You know,
Yep.
they're similar to exactly what you're talking about. But these are short stories, and it's great to have short stories that you can read, and you can actually read to your kids if they want to get a good scare or
Yeah. Yeah. If
a
if you
ghost
got
story. You know,
yeah, if you have spooky leaning kids, it'd be okay for them. But yeah, some of them are a bit frightening.
yeah, some parents wouldn't want that, but there's an age where the teenagers would like it. You know, they would like these stories, and especially when they're camping out or they're at a gathering.
Yeah.
Then they sit there and they tell stories, and somebody could read these stories off and take turns reading them off. And I see that
Yeah.
as a tool for people to have fun with. And
Yes.
whether you believe it or you don't believe it, it's still fun to
Yep.
hear this stuff. And it's same thing with the stories I cover in extraterrestrials and stuff. It's the same thing. You either believe or you don't believe, or seeing is believing. But most of these mythical monsters, they even had them in the Bible. You know,
Yeah. Yep.
there's about 8 different monsters in the Bible, Leviathan, and that type of thing. And so people were afraid of those, and they told stories about those, and that's folklore. So it comes way back in time. At Atlantis, those stories come out, and the Greek philosophers had a lot of stories of that nature they passed down. So I see this as a human trait,
Yeah.
passing down these folklore stories. And like I said, I had a class in college with folklore, and I enjoyed it. And we had to read, several books during that semester,
Mhm.
but it was neat to learn about it, and it's fun. It's a fun book. I think it's something that I think everybody would enjoy. And could you tell us how they can get these books? And we're going to be closing up the show. Can you believe it's an hour and a half just about already?
I know. We've just been sitting here talking.
Yeah,
It
you
was fun. Fun
yeah,
times.
yeah. We talked about it. I said, "Well, you want 60 minutes or 90 minutes?" And I looked at the book. I said, "Mike, I think you can go 90 minutes." You said, "Yeah, let's go as long as we can." But yeah,
Yeah.
uh, but no, it's fun. It was fun going through this, and it brought back childhood memories to me just
Yeah.
through some of these stories. But tell us where we can get a hold of your books and where you're at you have a website or you have a site that you go to for the information on your books and your readings, Mike.
Yep. So the book is available pretty much on any online bookstore. You can go out and find it there. Just, search Frightful Folklore of North America or my name, Mike Bass. Although there are quite a few Mike Basses out there in the world. It's amazing. Common name. But you can also go to your local bookstore if you want and ask them to order it. It's Penguin Random House, Watkins Publishing carries it, or they can get them from those two publishers. I do have a website called Ink and Story, where I publish a lot of my stories and tales and artwork. Um, you can also find me on Instagram at Wisco Mythos. Uh, I have a lot of stories posted there, and I add to it regularly. And then for prints, you can get those at our shop website that I run with my wife Natalie. It's called Zip Dang, and you can get it at zip-dang.com.
Okay. Yeah, I've got some of that information. I'll put that in the narrative,
Great.
the locations of the books and also your sites and the type of thing. And we want to thank everybody for listening in. And I think it was a fun show. It was, it could be scary but fun also, but I like
Yes.
it was fun talking about these things on a lighter note, on a storytelling note that
Yeah.
like Mike Boss, Frightful Folklore of North America, and also Folklore Oracle. Those two books, look him up. And Mike Boss, thank you so much for doing the show. You've been listening to Dave Emmons and the Strange Reality. And this was strange. I guess these stories are strange, but I think they're also reality. Like Mike was saying,
Mhm.
he thinks most of them are true, and they come from eyewitnesses who started these stories and took it from there. Thank you, everybody, for listening, and hope you enjoy the show on Strange Reality. Good night, Mike, and thank you very much for doing the show.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thanks for having me. It was fun.
Bye bye.